Everyone believes I'm loyal, but I've been secretly meeting my ex at a private island resort, and the first time I said those words out loud, even in a whisper to my own reflection while the kettle stuttered on the stove, I laughed, which is what your mouth does when your bones are terrified. I'm Myra, I'm 33, and I'm a travel nurse who can place and fall in the dark but apparently can't keep my heart from booking flights it has no business paying for, which is the sort of punchline the universe writes on a cocktail napkin and slides across the bar like, well, do you want the rest of the joke or not? I live on rotating schedules and rolling suitcases and food that can be eaten with one hand at 2 a.m., and if you've never been in a hospital at 2 a.m. you should know it's a world where time has bad manners, where alarms try to sing in harmony and fail, where you learn which of your coworkers' footsteps mean crash cart and which mean we're okay. When I tell you I'm good under pressure, I mean it. When I tell you I used that skill to build a doorway inside my supposedly decent life, I'm asking you to believe I didn't do it all at once. I did it the way we do everything complicated, one reasonable step that kept me from having to feel the whole weight of it. My husband is named Adrian. He's a software product manager, which means his calendar looks like a wall of sticky notes and his sentences are full of words like sprint and backlog and velocity that somehow never apply to laundry. He keeps our apartment in a state I call pleasant chaos. Mugs in wrong places, charges everywhere, one sock in the couch like it was contemplating a different life. He's kind in the way that makes baristas remember his order, and my mother say that boy has an honest forehead, which is her old country way of blessing a man she thinks will never make me cry in public. He's also the most reasonable person I've ever met, which is both his best quality and the way I learned how expertly I could hide inside reason. The ex is named Rowan, and if you're rolling your eyes at the name because it sounds like it owns a boat, well, it does now. Not his, the resort's. He's there because he photographs rich people's vacations and the spaces they buy to keep the rest of us out of, which is not the career path we predicted for him when we were 23 and living above a laundromat with a futon that insisted on folding back into a couch mid-argument. He used to shoot weddings and kitchens for restaurant openings and portraits of old men who built their own porches. He'd come home smelling like wood and hope. He took pictures like he was eavesdropping on light. We broke because he wanted the whole world and I wanted stability that didn't wobble when a new contract fell through. He said he needed to go where there were fewer reminders. I took another assignment and told myself the noble version, that we loved each other and the logistics didn't. Every lie deserves a clean sentence. The island came later, the way a problem always arrives disguised as an opportunity. I was finishing a 12-week contract at a hospital in Miami, more tourists than trauma, more heatstroke than heartbreak, and a colleague mentioned a resort off the coast that was hiring nurses on a trial basis to consult on their new wellness wing. A fancy spa wanted medical credibility like a brooch pinned to silk. It was private island this and bespoke salt therapy that, the kind of gig that pays you to be the adult in the room while people in robes try to turn adjectives into treatments. I said no twice because it sounded unserious and then yes once because the pay was rude and more honestly because the recruiter sent a photo of a dock that looked like a secret. When we ferried over for orientation, the water behaved like it had decided to be decorative. The island was small and smug, ringed with palm trees that bowed like they knew the choreography. The resort sat back from the beach as if it had learned manners at a finishing school for real estate. Low-slung villas with clipped shadows, white linens that were trying to prove a point, decks that pretended they'd invented sunsets. We were given lanyards and a schedule and a speech about discretion so careful it became flattery. Guests valued privacy, our staff was entrusted with their vulnerability, the island's charm depended on what was unspoken. I signed the non-disclosure with a pen that weighed more than some decisions I've made. He was in the dining pavilion like a ghost who hadn't gotten over the habit of being alive. Camera on his chest, lanyard tucked in his back pocket, a white shirt that made him look like someone said resort casual, and he translated it as forgive me. I didn't recognize him at first the way you don't recognize a street at dusk. Then he turned and there he was, the familiar architecture of someone I once thought was my address. He saw me and did that half-step people do when they're not sure if the past is allowed to approach. Myra, he said, like maybe the island issued doubles of the people you loved and you had to check the serial number. I laughed too bright, a hospital laugh, the kind I use to distract a patient while I start a line. Of course you're here, I said. The island has a budget for yearning. We kept it ordinary. I mean that sincerely. We talked about my contract and his work. He was there for a month shooting the kinds of photos a marketing department uses to prove a place is more than a place. Hands holding tropical fruit, shadows behaving themselves, towels that whisper the word luxury. I was there for a week to audit the spa's medicalized offerings, 4 vitamin drips over ocean views, sleep protocols that were just common sense with better adjectives, cardiac-safe yoga taught by flexible people who had never met a patient in atrial fibrillation in their lives. We joked like we used to and avoided the part where jokes were the furniture we arranged around harder truths. When my team started their walkthrough, he lifted his camera and asked if he could take a shot of us for the staff archive. He didn't take it. He looked at the lens like a window he could close or open at will, then let his hands drop and said later. The island had a staff bar, the only place where the music was allowed to be bad. That's where we actually met. Not on purpose, let me keep one small lie, but because nobody wants to drink coconut water on a lanyard. He bought me a beer like a man practicing being a stranger, and we stood on the deck with the kind of view richer people pay extra to hide their phones from, and the salt made everyone's hair more honest. We did the ranking of our least favorite fancy amenities, towel origami, unethical, and he said, "Do you ever miss the version of us that thought small was enough?" I said, "Do you ever miss the version of you that let myself be wrong about you without rehearsing your rebuttal?" He smiled the old way, a soft fall of light across a room. "There she is," he said. I should have walked back inside and asked one of the yoga instructors to teach me a posture called Don't. Instead, we watched a private boat send its elegant wake into the dock, and I remembered what my hands had learned when his were around. Here's something you should understand if you're going to judge me with any accuracy. I don't operate in grand gestures. Cheating for me, if we insist on that blunt word, was not bang-on-the-table drama. It was logistics. I learned the rhythms of the island. When the ferries came and went, when the spa locked its doors and went quiet, when the staff bar cleared out and left the sea a chance to speak. It was easy to be invisible. Everyone there was performing privacy. He texted me a room number that wasn't a room. It was a small deck behind the linen service where you could see nothing and everything at once. We stood there and counted the lights on boats and made a prayer out of not touching. We didn't cross anything that night. I want you to hear that like I need to believe it mattered. Back home, Adrian asked about the work like an attentive adult. I told him the resort had beautiful fruit but criminal protocols, which made him laugh because he loves when I turn my standards into poetry. I said nothing about the way the island sounded at 3 a.m., how the palms whispered like nervous witnesses, how the water scolded the beach and forgave it in the same gesture. I said nothing about a camera strap brushing across my back like a memory trying to make a point. The second trip wasn't a resort job. It was my own bad idea. He texted me a picture of a storm over the island, a roll of weather like a shoulder. "The off-season is better," he wrote. "Less perfection, more truth." I wrote back, "Truth is a marketing liability," and put my phone down and picked it up and put it down again until the patient I was charting on didn't need me anymore and I was free to be weak. We arranged it the way people arrange a crime they hope will be minor, carefully, with plausible deniability, with the reluctance of grown-ups who know they will be paying interest for years. I booked 3 days into my schedule like a reward for surviving 14 in a row. I said conference to Adrian and he said pack your sandals like he was helping. In the airport I nearly turned back 3 times, a choreography of conscience. The kiosk printed my boarding pass anyway. If you want the cinematic version, you can have it. The island in off-season is a different creature. Fewer guests, more weather. The air felt less filtered, less curated for the taste of money. We met in the staff bar again because we are absurdly loyal to rituals. This time his hand found my elbow, that universal human hinge, and we weren't good anymore. There's a piece that comes before the wrong thing, like the last unbroken plate of a set. We left before the band on the tiny stage could make a bad song worse. In the service corridor, a rolling rack of towels stood like a white-furred animal. We stood like people waiting for permission that never arrived. Then he kissed me the way a room remembers being a room after they remodel it into something fashionable. My fingers remembered more than I wanted them to. The towels watched. The sea didn't. The resort had a villa empty on the cliff's bend, too far from anyone's dignity. He had a key because privacy is part of the photography department's charter, or because the island is built on a certain intimacy with rules. The villa's deck held 2 chairs that would have been arrogant if they'd been human. We sat in them and tried to practice adulthood. "We're going to hurt other people," I said. He nodded like a man who had decided to be decent. "I know. We should stop," I said. He nodded again and didn't move his hand from mine. We should have, of course. Instead, we went inside like that choice had been waiting there with the lights off. I wish I could tell you I didn't love it. That it was clumsy and guilt-riddled and immediately regrettable. But my body, that traitor, was happier than my mind, and happiness is a hard thing to argue with when you spend your nights watching monitors and persuading blood pressure back towards sense. We slept badly and beautifully. He made coffee with a tiny machine that hissed like a complaining aunt. I stood in the open doorway wrapped in expensive linen and watched the horizon negotiate with itself. We kept saying I should go home and then we kept not moving. It wasn't grand. It was a conversation between shoulders and hands that had always known what to say. When I did go home, Adrian met me at the door with that practical sweetness that never makes for a viral tweet. He'd bought the good bread. He'd watered my basil. He kissed me like I was the person who ran toward him in a crowded room, and I felt like a thief who steals and then donates to charity. He asked how the conference was, and I said instructive, which is a kind of truth if you scrape off the mercy. That night he fell asleep with his face turned toward me like he wanted to learn a new word. I stared at the ceiling and listened to the city pretend to be ocean. I thought about rules as medicine. How you take them until the side effects become the disease. After that, the meetings weren't constant. If they had been, I might have been honest or at least gotten caught. They were spaced just far enough apart to let me pretend I could keep 2 lives from touching. We developed a language I still hate myself for appreciating. Weather meant is the island possible soon. Shifts meant are you working nights and heartsick. Deck meant don't say the room number in a text. I told myself I was careful. I told myself I was protecting everyone. I told myself a lot of things because people will do anything to keep the story where they are not the villain. I even told my sister once I'm not completely alone in my sins, and she said don't mistake adventure for freedom, and I said nothing because she had a toddle on her hip and a life built out of routine and casseroles, and I needed to believe I was pursuing something she couldn't understand. The closest I came to being caught was petty. It was sand. Adrian found it in the dryer filter, a glitter of islands in our landlocked week. He laughed and said, "Did the laundromat wash a beach with our clothes?" I laughed too loudly and said, "They'll deposit a marina next time." He kissed my cheek and went to adjust the thermostat, and I stood at the dryer and pressed my thumb into the lint like a child finger painting with crime. I started to realize that what I was protecting wasn't my marriage as it was the version of myself who could still claim competence as a moral category. I wish I could tell you the island ran out of magic. It didn't. It got stranger. The resort had a client, a family whose money had its own weather system, who rented the whole place for a week to celebrate a patriarch turning 70 with a face that pretended 40. Rowan was on call for them like a polite paparazzo. My contract was long over, but he sent me a message that said, "Come see the island when it's pretending to be a person," and I checked my calendar and found 3 days I could rearrange without breaking anything but my integrity. I booked a flight. On the boat to the island, I listened to 2 staffers complain about the family's requests. Pelicans moved for a photo, the sea asked to be less opinionated, and I laughed into my shirt because power always sounds like it's never been told no by a nurse at 3 a.m. We stole hours at the edges, the only time we could. He slipped away between portrait sessions. I waited in the service corridor with the towels like some Lady Macbeth of laundry. We stood in the villa that wasn't ours and pretended the world was a reasonable size. Outside, the rich had a fireworks display that made the sky flinch. Inside, we tried not to get ash on the sheets. He said, "I think about a life with you like a person thinks about mourning." I said, "Mourning always comes with bills." He smiled, not sadly so much as accurately. "I know." He told me about a job he might take in Lisbon. I told him about a permanent contract a hospital offered in Denver. We both said the word stable and the air rolled its eyes. In the end, it wasn't guilt that made me stop. It was the island. It grew too sharp, too much itself. A storm came in wrong all at once, and the resort shut the shutters and the staff moved like they'd practiced 100 times, and boats tied themselves up like obedient dogs. The island wasn't a fantasy anymore. It was a place with edges and instructions. We sat on the floor, backs to the bed, and listened to the roofs have their conversation with the wind. This is what it would be like, he said, and I knew he meant storms and 5 o'clock dinners, and who are we when there isn't a secret to make us interesting? I don't know if I can be brave without an island, I said. He put his chin on my shoulder like a person who'd chosen a side. Maybe we stop asking the island to do our work. I went home after the storm. I told Adrian more truth than I had in months and less than I needed to. I said I felt like a person who had become useful instead of loved. He said quietly that he sometimes felt managed instead of married. We looked at each other like two people examining a map in a language they used to know. We started therapy. We stopped meeting in hallways and started meeting in rooms with chairs that were not there to be impressed. I blocked Rowan's number for a week. Then I unblocked it and sent a message that said, I need to try to be one person. He replied, I know. I cried into a kitchen towel because drama isn't always pretty. People ask about loyalty like it's a brand of toothpaste. Do you use it, yes or no? I wish it were that clean. Here's what's true right now in a room without ocean sounds. I have not been back to the island. I walk past travel posters of water so blue it looks like the printer made a mistake and think I was the mistake. I sit with Adrian and ask him what the best minute of his day was, a question our therapist gave us like a fresh towel, and he says, when you handed me coffee and didn't also hand me a to-do list, and I say, when you said you wanted to fix the sink together instead of suggesting I let you do it, and we both laugh because intimacy is ridiculous and the sink still drips. I text Rowan sometimes, fewer words than I want and more honesty than I used to. He sends me a photo from time to time of nothing in particular. Light hiding behind a curtain, a cup with a hairline crack, a dock with nobody on it, and I send a heart like a grown-up who knows symbolism is a dangerous spice. He is leaving for Lisbon. I am staying for Denver. Or maybe the other way around. Either way, the plane isn't the story is what survives the landing. Everyone believes I'm loyal. Some days I am, and my goodness it's quiet. It feels like a room before the guests arrive. Some days I can still feel the island's deck under my feet if I stand a little wrong in the shower, the way a body stores geography like gossip. If you're waiting for me to give you a neat ending, choose him, choose something, I won't. I'm choosing one day at a time to use fewer secret doors. I'm choosing to love like a nurse, clocking in on purpose, knowing I won't save everyone, hoping to harm no one, planning for emergencies I'll likely never see. Tonight, Adrian will salt the pasta too much and I'll pretend I like it, and then I'll be honest and he'll laugh and add more tomatoes, and we'll eat on the couch and the city will hum a song it wrote before we were born. I'll put my phone in the drawer and let it be dark. I'll boil water for tea and listen for sirens and think about boats tied up like obedient dogs before a storm. I'll miss the island the way you miss a mistake that made you feel beautiful. I'll stay anyway in this ordinary room with its leaky sink and honest light, practicing loyalty like a language I can relearn if I say it aloud enough times to believe I'm the person who's speaking.